The presence of so many influential leaders and experts underlines the importance of the subjects we are discussing today. They are issues which TERI has been at the forefront in identifying and in addressing. 40 years ago, green energy and sustainable development were at the top of very few agendas. The decision to set up TERI in 1974 was an example of the vision and the intellectual leadership which is the hallmark of this country. These qualities have never been more essential. Ladies and gentlemen, the contrast and the challenges we see around the world have rarely been greater. Collectively, we are better off than any previous generation could have imagined. Prosperity has spread from the mature economies of Europe and North America to Asia, Latin America, and more recently to Africa. Asia has seen a spectacularly dynamic transformation and is now a major driver of the global economy and global growth. This growth has reduced by 50% the number of people living in extreme poverty since 1990. But we all know that this is only half the story. Despite this progress, hundreds of millions of people lack access to food, water, and energy, the very basic necessities of life, as we heard from Dr. Pauchari. 1 in 8 of our fellow human beings do not have enough food to eat. In the Asia-Pacific region, 1.7 billion people lack access to sanitation, and 680 million are without electricity. Inequality is growing both within and between nations. According to the Oxfam report, the richest 85 people in the world today own as much wealth as the poorest 2.5 billion. Here in India and across the world, we remain a long way from our goal of decent life for all. For we are exploiting the finite resources at an alarming rate and causing huge damage to our environment. We cannot continue to exploit the resources of the world as if there is no tomorrow. Our existing model of development does not give an economic value to fresh water, energy, biodiversity, and environmental resources. As a result, we have not prioritized in our policy making. Instead, wasteful production and consumption patterns are encouraged. The challenges are growing. Each year, 10 million people in India alone move to towns and cities as a result of overpopulation and as a result of population growth and urbanization. An expanding middle class is changing lifestyles and consumption patterns, increasing pressure on natural resources. It is now estimated that by 2030, we will need 30% more water, 40% more energy, and 50% more food. Looming above all these challenges and exacerbating them is climate change. As India knows, climate change is not a future threat as it already impacts people's lives and livelihoods. A recent report suggests that a quarter of India's landmass has been affected by temperatures and fluctuations in rainfall. Across the world, more frequent extreme weather events are reducing harvests and forcing people off their land. No country or society will escape the impacts of climate change. But as always, it is the poorest and the most vulnerable who suffer most. Ladies and gentlemen, these interlinked challenges cannot be addressed by tinkering around the edges. A fundamental shift to a more sustainable development pathway is urgently required. We must do more to promote integrated policy making which addresses social and environmental goals and not just economic targets. Making the transition from brown to green economy is perhaps the biggest challenge of our age. It will require leadership, courage, and commitment from all the sectors represented here: government, business, academia, and civil society. No one has all the answers, but let me try to set out a few. First, we have to act on climate change. We need a robust, universal, and legally binding agreement to limit temperature rises to less than 2 degrees Celsius, above which climate change may be irreversible. The agreement to be reached in Paris next year. For agreement to be reached in Paris next year, every country, whatever their stage of development, must raise their sights and commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But fairness demands that richer countries lead in the scale of their emission cuts and in providing financial support and adaptation and diffusion of green technology. Internationally and nationally, the right policies and incentives must be put in place to ensure a shift to renewable and efficient sources of energy. This would include putting a price on carbon and phasing out harmful fossil fuel subsidies. Second, sustainability must be at the heart of the global development framework which succeeds the Millennium Development Goals in 2015. The Millennium Development Goals have helped countries lift millions out of poverty and increased access to health, education, and drinking water. But as we transform to a new development framework, we must ensure that environmental degradation, inequality, and unemployment are tackled through ambitious and universal sustainable goals. These new goals must improve quality of life and access to opportunity for the poorest and the marginalized. They must create decent jobs for the youth. Thirdly, sustainability must be at the core of national policy making. Too often, policies to manage food, water, energy resources are developed and implemented in isolation when we know that they are interlinked. Governments must do more to foster policy coherence and encourage cooperation between ministries and stakeholders. Only then will we have the right incentives to encourage more efficient and sustainable production and consumption frameworks. Fourth, accelerating the shift to sustainability will require leveraging the full potential of every human being. Women and girls are major drivers of development, yet challenges to eliminating discrimination and achieving gender equality remain significant. In India and elsewhere, women continue to be denied opportunities to have a voice in decisions that affect their lives and those of their families and communities. We see a continuing gender gap in education, the greatest investment any country can make in its future. In too many countries, women face unacceptably high levels of violence, including sexual violence, which is an affront to our common humanity. So we must dedicate ourselves to transforming relations between men and women at all levels of society and put the welfare of women and girls at the heart of all that we do. My dear friends, the role of government is vital in catalyzing action on these priorities. But delivering the fundamental shift to a new sustainable model is not the responsibility of governments alone. The private sector is the main engine of the global economy and accounts for 2/3 of the use of natural resources. It has an enormous responsibility and an indispensable role to play. Businesses, big and small, must embed sustainable development goals in their policy, production, and processes, and their value chain. So I was happy with what you said when you received the prize, and I hope others will follow that lead. They can drive research, innovation, and investment to facilitate the transition to a green economy. South-South cooperation can play a major role by sharing these advances across regions. Civil society must also bring their expertise to bear. By working closely with local communities, they are ideally placed to ensure that government policies meet local needs and priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, the well-being of our global economy depends on overcoming these challenges. With courage, vision, and renewed spirit of solidarity, we can move decisively towards a truly sustainable development path. We really have no time to waste. Let me wish you a successful conference. Thank you very much.